Hi, I'm Remy Perry, and I represent caregivers on the Brain Injury Association of York Region. It's been just over a decade since my wife and I were in a car accident that ended her career and began mine as a caregiver. Well, looking after someone with a host of symptoms, and I can tell you, talking to other caregivers, that can follow these kinds of injuries is a pretty big job, and that job gets even more demanding as both the survivor and the caregiver get older. At some point, the caregiver and the survivor and their loved ones might have to admit that it's time to get some extra help. The first transition is sometimes from the facility to home. The second one can be sometimes from the home to either long-term care or a retirement home. Navigating that landscape, looking for a retirement home, finding the right one can be a huge task. And today, I've got three people who can maybe help us with some of that. I'm starting with Taz Lalani. She is an occupational therapist who has been in private practice since 2004 and has helped many people transition in both directions. And as part of her job, has helped people find the right retirement home and transition to it. We're also joined by Daniel Clarke. His story kind of reminds me a little bit of mine. He was a caregiver who had to find a retirement home for his grandmother a while back and found it very overwhelming and confusing. And because as a result of that, has decided to make a website that helps caregivers such as us look for the right retirement homes that meet the criteria that they're looking for. Finally, Jill Franks is Community Relations Manager for Viva Thornhill Woods Retirement Community, one of the excellent retirement homes that are available here in Ontario, and she will give us a better idea of what is offered at these homes. Welcome, all three of you.
Thank you,
I'd like
Remy.
to start out with the question I think that it occurs to a lot of caregivers that hits them, and I know hit Daniel at one point. What do caregivers most underestimate about the transition to retirement homes? Who would like to answer that one?
I'll start just sort of with some of the experiences that I've had. And this is really where my role comes into place because I am usually the first point of contact for either the caregiver or sometimes even the loved one themselves. And oftentimes, when somebody does call me, it's always driven by an event which is full of emotions. So sometimes transitions need to be done very quickly. They might be in the hospital and looking for a solution where to go before they can return home, or even on a permanent basis. And oftentimes, the hospital's timeline is quite short. So when people do call me, they're very stressed. They don't know what even to ask. So part of my role is to really help slow them down, discuss the different options, whether it is a retirement home or even sometimes going back to home with home care, really finding the best solution for that person. And one thing that I think caregivers sometimes don't always think to ask is that it's really a decision that's made for the whole family. So, although yes, we're looking for a solution for the loved one or the person who had the brain injury, it really needs to be the right fit for the whole family. Is the location appropriate? Are the services and even just the social activities appropriate for the loved one?
So you help them with actually what to ask. Daniel,
Absolutely.
Daniel, did you, has Jill pretty much covered it?
Yeah, and so one thing that I piggyback on what Jill had to say, because she's had a lot of the really important things for families to consider is also just the range of options that are available. So last year I toured 77 retirement homes, and every retirement home was unique and different in its own way, because so much of the personality of the home is made up by the residents who are in the home and the staff. So if you've seen one retirement home, you've only seen one, and that there is such a range out there that are meant to suit different personalities, different interests. And so it is important to try and get around to a couple of different homes.
Would you say that the people that are actually living in the retirement home and the staff, is that the most important? Because I talk to caregivers, they talk about location, they talk about sometimes retirement homes are culturally based, sometimes they are, and another one that they look at, quite frankly, is the cost of the retirement home. Which you think are the biggest criteria that determine what
And so something that we find with people who are looking on Eldorados, generally people are looking in a defined geographic area. So you're looking at homes where the location's going to work for them, where it's within their budget. And then outside of that, there are some amazing amenities at retirement homes. You've got pools, you've got movie theaters, you sometimes see like golf simulators. I was in a home where it had a pickleball court within it, and all those things can be great, but so much of your time is going to be spent and around the residents and around your fellow residents and with the staff, that really finding a home where you can feel at home and you can feel comfortable, that's going to be so much more important than any of the specific amenities, because that is really going to be what makes up what day-to-day life is going to be like for you in that home.
As have you noticed, is that a very important aspect of it, or have you noticed some other criteria that become more important, particularly with brain injury survivors?
Yeah, and I think it's also important to speak to Ontario's landscape and the population that we have in Ontario and the various cultures, languages that we have. So I'm going to say, first and foremost, we have some predominant cultures in Ontario where retirement homes and long-term care homes are not even considered as part of the long-term care of somebody. So they really want to try to keep their person at home as much as they can. And I would say it's in the last maybe 2, 3 decades that that is really shifting now, where those families are starting to notice that they can't cope, they can't do it. But for example, I come from a culture where you take care of your elderly and you do it as best as you can, and generations kind of look after each other. So I think what's interesting about what Jill is saying is that's a lot of truth, what Jill is saying in terms of the urgency that people all often experience. It's not just that all of a sudden there's an urgent situation and now they're forced. It's literally because these families haven't thought about it, they haven't planned for it, and they didn't really feel they were going to get to a point where that was a decision they were going to make. So speaking of any condition, it doesn't matter if you're speaking about brain injury, if you're speaking about somebody with multiple sclerosis and somebody else who might have another condition. I think first and foremost is that for planning is not really happening in a lot of families for whatever reason. And that's probably a start of where an occupational therapist really can play a good role early on. We're in a lot of homes early. We are called in because of different reasons, and we can sort of look down the path and say, this person is likely not going to keep doing well in a home with stairs. That's a conversation we can start early on. Or there's falls. Falls are so prevalent, happening so much in our older population, and falls can really change someone's life. That's how brain injuries are happening in Ontario. So it's a bigger discussion, but I find everyone's in a different place in a spectrum where they don't know what they're going to be doing with a family member.
Now,
So
both you and Jill mentioned that last minute scramble to find something, whether it's as a result of a brain injury or admitting at the last second, well, wait a second, this isn't working. We're going to need some extra help. As people who have experience in this search, when would you say is a good time? How much lead time should caregivers give before for finding a retirement home, the right retirement home for their loved ones?
I'll hop on here. So I think it needs to be discussed right away at any stage. So oftentimes I'll do presentations talking about how people are starting to plan for their retirement, thinking at the age of 60, 65, what are they going to do when they retire? And there's a lot of talk and discussion around retirement savings, but I think people sort of think about that meaning, what are you going to do when you stop working and you get to travel, or really planning for that? There's very limited discussions on what you are going to do once you are elderly. So once you are in your 70s, in your 80s, in your 90s, what is the plan for that? So a lot of the talks that I do talk about the different options and most importantly, the cost that is associated with that, so that people do understand that as they are aging and becoming more elderly, and chances are will need more care, even if it's from the offerings of a retirement home where all of your meals are including, your housekeeping is included. So not so much care from a PSW or a nurse, but just lifestyle supports. You need to understand what that is going to cost you so that you can prepare for it. So I certainly like to have conversations. A lot of times it'll start with the adult decision makers so that they can really have these discussions with their loved ones who may be resistant to considering a retirement home, sometimes because they think that there is the stigma around retirement homes or nursing homes and not really having the true understanding. And that's where I'll say with Taz, I think that it is shifting a lot. People are understanding that retirement homes really is more of a social model with supports in place when needed, but it's really the opportunity to have people do your cooking and your cleaning for you so that you can still maintain your independence. So I certainly promote having these discussions as early as possible as you can with your families.
And do those discussions happen a little bit earlier, Taz? Have you noticed with people who have brain injuries? Does this timeline get accelerated?
I'd like to say optimally it would be nice to say yes, but I don't think that's happening. I'm going to say I don't think it's happening with brain injuries, and I don't think it's happening in general, because sometimes even with brain injury, Remy, as you and I both know,
Hmm.
people can still function, people can still
Yeah.
be in their homes, but it's everyone else around them that's sort of having the tougher time managing care and resources. And so again, the conversation doesn't up because it's such a heavy conversation to have. It's such something
Hmm.
so emotionally burdened for people. And I like Jill, we're going to discuss this more, but Jill did mention long-term care homes. And so that is something I know we're going to discuss is what's the
Hmm.
difference
Yes.
between a retirement home and a long-term care home, because we do have options in Ontario depending on the level of care. And that's the other conversation that has to take place, which in my opinion, needs to take place with a health professional is about what type of care does this person need. It may not be a retirement home. This person might be unfortunately going straight into a long-term care facility, depending on how things have evolved at home. And unfortunately, if an urgent situation did come up and the medical situation is so bad in terms of a brain injury, right? For example, if they're very low functioning, then they're probably going to be looking at something like a long-term care.
You touched on that, and actually, that was going to be one of my. I'll move that question up. What is the difference? Because when people think of retirement homes, and certainly when I thought of a retirement home, I thought they were synonyms. What is the difference between a long-term care facility and a retirement home?
I can speak to that. So long-term care homes are government subsidized care homes where the family is responsible for a copay, and that copay is meant to cover your room and board, but then through Ontario Health, all the care you receive is covered. And at pretty much all long-term care homes, the rate is basically the same. So it's close to $2,100 right now for a basic room. It's around $2,500 for a semi-private room and just shy of $3,000 for a private room. If you're in an older building, it could be slightly less than that, but that's roughly where it falls. But really, the big thing being that the government covers the cost of all your care. So as your care needs increase, your rate doesn't increase. Whereas in retirement homes, it's 100% private pay. So within a retirement home, all the care services that you're receiving, you're going to be paying for. Now, there still is the opportunity to receive home care through Ontario Health at Home. So if you were somewhere like Viva Thornhill Woods. I haven't spoken to you about this, Jill, but I imagine you guys are on cluster care where Ontario Health at Home is able to come in and provide some of that care. But everything that you're receiving through the retirement home is all private pay, and that's where we have the big and a delta in cost where you aren't paying for any of your care in a long-term care home, whereas you're paying for all of your care in a retirement home. But then likewise with retirement homes are where you're going to get a lot more of those. Generally, the lifestyle options are enhanced because they have nicer amenities. A
You get
lot of
what you pay.
times the food is going to be a lot better, like things like that. And then also for some long-term care homes, you've got a minor wait list, but or sorry, for some retirement homes, you've got a short wait list. But for long-term care, we're looking at around 50,000 people right now waiting for long-term care in Ontario.
And what kind of timeline is that? If you've got 50,000 people ahead of you, depending, I guess, on the part of Ontario you live in, what kind of timeline are we looking at to get in?
So it actually has less of an impact on where in Ontario, and it has a lot more on your placement category. So
Really?
waiting for long-term care works very similarly to if you were in an emergency room and you're waiting to see the doctor, where they triage, and the people who have the highest care needs are the ones who get in first. So people who are category one or on the crisis list, they're going to get into long-term care before anybody that's at any of the lower
Okay.
priority categories. So there are certainly people that get into long-term care within a month of applying,
Right.
but because they have incredibly high care needs, whereas
Mhm.
there's other people that wait for years, and they are going to still be waiting for years because they're in a lower placement category. So everybody in category one gets offered the bed before it goes to category two, category three, and then down to category four. So the reality is, in our current system, it's very rare that any of the bed offers get below category one.
And how does that contrast with retirement homes, Jill? What is your lead time for that? And how does the severity of the needs of the future resident impact when they get in, how they get in, what they're looking at?
So retirement homes, it really would be based upon availability. So many retirement homes have both independent living and assisted living options, and some now even do have memory care options, which would be a higher level of care similar to long-term care. It does depend on the particular home and their availability. So if there is a room available, again, you are moving in. It's almost like condo style living. So when you move in, you are bringing in your own furniture. You do require to set up the suite yourself. But and there's a lease involved. There is a medical form by a doctor, and usually the wellness lead in the retirement home needs to do their assessment. But the whole process itself can be done quite quickly as long as there is availability.
So what do you mean by quite quickly? What are we talking here?
So for independent living, somebody, if we have the suite available, they come in, they tour, they put the deposit down on their suite. If their doctor is really quick and they can get that form filled out right away, our nurse can come do an assessment the next day. All of our lease signing, everything is done digitally. We can accommodate a very quick move within a couple days.
Wow, is very quick. You also mentioned something when we got together a while back called respite care. Could you elaborate on that? Because I don't think everybody knows about what that means.
Absolutely. And sometimes it gets lost a bit just with the different terminology that's thrown out. But respite care is typically it's a short-term stay.
Mhm.
So there's no permanent lease, but it is a short-term agreement. And with respite stay, then it will be almost like a hotel room stay. So all of your furniture will be provided, usually your TV, your internet, but then as well as all of the amenities as if you were living here permanently. So all of your meals, access to all of the programs, but it offers a short-term solution for the person before determining what the long-term care plan is. So we often see respite stays for someone coming from the hospital. So maybe they did have a fall or something happened and they aren't quite strong enough yet to go back home. So we would be sort of that bridging point for where they come here, they participate in our programs, our exercise classes, get proper nutrition so that they do build up their strength in order to go back home. And sometimes it really does just act as a trial stay too. Sometimes they don't know yet if a retirement home is appropriate, if that is what their long-term solution is going to be. So they can come here for that short-term stay to really determine if that is the right fit. And
If
that
it's
works from both ways, both for the family and the loved one, as well as from the home themselves too. Especially if we're dealing with different care needs, we need to make sure that it's the right appropriate level of care for us as well. And then another time that we do see respite care is if a loved one is traveling or even there's a lot of caregiver burnout and they just need a little bit of time for themselves and so that we can relieve that burden and take care of their loved one. They know they are in a completely safe, supportive environment so they themselves can get the respite that they need.
so all of the Vivo locations offer that. Daniel, does your website, is that one of the criteria that you can enter is respite care to find out which facilities offer that?
Yeah, so you can filter both on Eldorado, and we also have an availability registry, which is a database of retirement homes that have current availability. So you can see if you're perhaps in a crisis situation and you're looking to find a retirement home right away that can being able to move in quickly. And just with some of the poor weather that we're having
Hmm.
right now, we've noticed a big increase in people reaching out to homes, inquiring about respite stays for winter periods of time where perhaps they're concerned about their mom or their dad and shoveling and going out to get groceries and all that sort of stuff. Whereas if you can be in a retirement home, you can escape the snow without having to fly down south.
Now, Taz, you've probably helped out with respite care as well. How does it differ from a more long-term approach, where they're looking for a longer retirement home where they're going to be there for the duration as opposed to for a short period of time?
So for respite care, it oftentimes in my situation has been somebody who either has undergone some surgery or has had some change in their health condition. But it could even be somebody, we're speaking about brain injury, it could be somebody who just sustained a concussion, let's say. So it could be someone even older who had a concussion and they're just in that period of time where they're just not doing well and they need some extra care, but the family, they might be living independently and now the family's worried about their ability to stay on their own. So for somebody like that, a short term, we also call it a short term stay or respite care,
Hmm.
where somebody might just need to go in to a retirement home and have some care services provided to them, be in a place where they're also getting some degree of level of supervision, but also services can be added on. And then here's the great part, and we saw this when we visited Viva Thornhill
Hmm.
Woods, is a lot of these facilities have gyms and they've got really good facilities where therapy can take place. And so I have also myself gone into retirement homes to actually continue providing treatment to somebody that I might be treating, or the family's contacted occupational therapists or physiotherapists, speech language pathologists, whoever it is, to come into the home to provide services. So really it is looked at as a short term. However, we did discuss this with Jill when we saw her too. For some people, it also becomes a window into what's available and becomes like that open door where now you can have a conversation about, does this person maybe need a transition? And then what type of transition, what does that look like? Jill knows right now, and this is completely transparent. I've just recommended somebody who might do well at Thornhill Woods for respite. And I've just suggested that name to a family member who's really struggling with somebody who's going to be undergoing surgery. And so now they're going to have that conversation with Jill. And one of the reasons I chose also Thornhill Woods is something that Daniel speaks about is looking at something in people's geographic area. So even for respite care, that's what people usually look for is something in their area, something close by, because these families also have to trek and travel and services, and you want to make sure that everything is familiar to that person.
Hmm.
So that's what we look for.
So you take every bit as much care as if it were a longer term stay with respite care, even though they may only be there for a couple months.
Absolutely. And we're asking all the questions because I have gone into some retirement homes where I've asked a question, and if I get some hesitation, that's not the place I'm going to choose. So sometimes I'll get sort of the answer, we could do this, or we could. And Jill knows this is like, and Jill's not probably one of the people who does this, but when we hear hesitation, that makes us nervous as a health professional. And so I'm also going in there looking to see what the response is when I'm telling them about this person and what the care needs are, even if they're short term.
And that brings me to my next question is the red flags. When we're looking at this, and Daniel, I guess you can address this, and even Jill as well, what are some of the bigger red flags that caregivers need to look for when they're looking at retirement homes, long-term care, this type of thing, when they do the tour, when they talk to the people? And I assume you do need to do a tour and go in and do some interviewing. What should we be looking for here?
Yeah, I'm definitely a very big advocate of Eldorado can be a great tool to narrow your search, but really think it's important to actually boots on the ground and get to go on a tour of the home. So it's going to sound a little bit cliche, but it really needs to feel comfortable to you. That is going to be something that's really important. And different people are going to be looking for different things. So there are homes that are going to be a lot more social. So something that I've heard before is it's always a good sign if when you walk in, you hear a lot of chattering going on and you see the staff and the residents engaging. And for a lot of people that can be great. But then there's going to be certain people that are a lot more private, and that isn't going to be what is quite the right fit for them. So something that does always stand out to me, and this is where I'm going to be giving Jill a little bit of a pat on the back because I have got to tour at Viva Thornhill Woods, and the fact where walking around with Jill, where she's able to say hi to so many residents and actually saying their name. So kind of having that really understanding who's in her community and who those people are, something that it's not so much of that if they don't do that, it isn't guaranteed a red flag, but it's very much a green flag for me when I'm going on a tour and the community relations manager is able to say hi to residents by name. But it really is important that you feel comfortable where you're staying. And if you have that gut feeling like this just doesn't feel quite right, then certainly tour other homes. There isn't an expectation that when you go in to tour a home that you're gonna, that you have to move that process forward. So the expectation is that you're going to tour multiple different homes. So if somewhere doesn't feel quite right, then take note of that and then try somewhere else and see if you feel more comfortable somewhere else.
Do you have, when I go and I look at, for example, a cruise or a vacation or to travel somewhere, one of the big advantages of the technology of today is that I can look at reviews from thousands of people. Is there a way that caregivers can contact other caregivers or people who sure, you could stop and start questioning the residents, but it's a little tedious. Is there a way that we can reach out and find out what other people think of the home?
So there are things, so we utilize like Google reviews and things like that. And that unfortunately ends up usually being pretty polarizing. Like, I see a lot of 5-star reviews and 1-star reviews, but not a lot of where you really get into what people's actual opinions are. So right now we don't have a network where you're able to kind of connect with other people that are in the home. But something that I have found is every single time I've toured a retirement home, there are residents that are very happy to kind of engage with you and get to chat. There's a lot of times there's going to be some sort of bistro or cafe where you might be able to get a coffee or a tea, and that's a great opportunity to engage with residents. And then also a lot of times when you're going on a tour, they're going to invite you if you want to stay for lunch. And I would always recommend staying for lunch, not just because then you get a taste of what the food is like that's on offer, but you also get to observe. There's going to be residents who are coming in who perhaps they're getting assistance with ambulation to get to their seat. Maybe you're going to see the way that different people are interacting and seeing if it's going to be something that it feels like it could fit with you and the lifestyle that you want to live.
And Viva offers a lot of that. One of the things that I noticed when I went to Viva, particularly as someone who is a caregiver and someone with a brain injury and has met many with brain injuries, is that a lot of the focus for retirement homes has been on people with whether it's a brain injury that caused their brain challenges, but a lot of retirement homes are set up for things like executive functioning, memory fog, kind of being confused, that type of thing. One of the things that I think Taz mentioned is, or Daniel, I believe, is that some retirement homes are very social. There's a lot of people interacting. There's a lot of activities going on, and that may not necessarily fit the person that you're transferring in. Taz, Daniel, Jill, someone with a brain injury, would you think that their criteria might be a little bit different? Is it a function of their brain injury, or is it a function of their personality, a combination, their age? What are we looking at here that might make one retirement home a better choice than another?
I think it makes a big difference. So we know that brain injury, also depending on the gender, people experience different symptoms. And as people age, unfortunately, the brain does not improve in function. Oftentimes we'll see an exacerbation of brain injury issues that were there even maybe 5 or 10 years ago, but now they're getting worse. Also, the brain injury population is more susceptible to dementia and Alzheimer's. And so now you may have those superimposed on the brain with people who are entering a retirement home, and again, could be a long-term care facility if they need to go in for more care and supervision. but it absolutely matters. So it's interesting listening to Daniel, and he's absolutely right. Like, it's a unique scenario. But when I walked into Thornhill Viva Woods, for example, I noticed the whole social atmosphere. And I thought it was great because, generally speaking, for a healthy population, that is really good. For certain brain injury individuals, walking
Mhm.
into a large space with a lot of noise and social, and I'm not picking on Thornhill. That's the environment as an OT I want to see in a retirement home, regardless, because there
Yes.
should be quieter spaces that somebody can go. But I will tell you that the person I'm recommending to the home has other health issues, one of them being a brain injury that I'm recommending for the respite care. And so that was at the top of my mind, is how is this person going to react to this social noise going on in the common areas a lot. And this person's
Will
a
it be
little bit
overstimulating? Yeah.
correct. And this person is more of a introvert. And so I didn't want a situation where she or he now goes and stays in their room all day long for respite care, which is going to defeat the purpose of this entire progression of health. And so I did tell the family they need to go do a tour. And ultimately, yes, the family is important, but ultimately, the person needs to be observed.
Of
The
course.
reaction, it's that gut feeling of the person that really needs to be talked to and say, what do you think about this place? And I will say this again, it is very helpful to have a health professional accompany them. It does not have to be an occupational therapist that's treating them. It could be a social worker. It could even be a PSW that's working with them in the home that might be willing to just come and visit because they know that person well. They know the care needs. And so when we talk about red flags, for example, when Daniel talks about red flags, there's red flags that we also look at as health professionals when I walk into a home. And
So it's
they're
important to
much
have that person with you because a
correct,
caregiver, we're
correct.
walking into a home, we're looking at, well, I guess this is as good as it gets. But whereas someone who's an occupational therapist or a rehab support worker, whoever, has a bigger global view of that situation. Jill, Daniel, how much are you set up for those type of needs, that need for quiet, that need to get away from some of the big bustling activity? And Daniel, maybe you can talk about that after Jill. How do retirement homes vary in that? Do some of them offer it? Do some of them not? How does that work? Jill.
Yeah, for sure. And definitely, I think that was something that I wanted to touch on too, is that where it really is a team of caregivers, both coming from the retirement home, but certainly it's the ongoing care from the family too, and the conversation around understanding what the person's triggers are, what their coping strategies are, right from the beginning, and being as transparent and as much information as possible shared right at the beginning so that we are set up for success and to help support the person. Because there are many places, and sometimes you don't see everything on a tour because the building is so large, and especially if the person with the brain injury is touring as well, maybe there's some mobility or fatigue
Hmm.
issues. So that's where it's really important to do your discovery, ask the right questions to understand what the most appropriate places to show are. If someone has expressed that they don't swim, they maybe even have a fear of water, I'm not going to show them the pool. Or
No.
if they don't like dark spaces or loud noises and hate movies, I'm not going to bring them down to the theater. But if they share that they do like to have the social environment, yet they do want a quieter place to eat, then maybe that's where I would show them the assisted living dining room. That is a smaller dining room, smaller options for meal times, or different areas for reading in our library, or just really try and tailor the tour based on what that individual really is looking for.
And Daniel, have you noticed, is Viva typical of this, where they have quiet areas, perhaps quiet programs, mindfulness, things like that?
And it goes back to there's so many different retirement homes that take a different approach. So some are very specialized. So there are retirement homes that specialize in really, we just do independent living here, or we just do memory care here. And then there's other homes, Viva, where there's more of that continuum of care where you can go from independent living and then progressing into, if you need more care needs, into assisted living. So there's different ways that can be approached. And then for how the actual care is delivered at I've been at some retirement homes where they have almost a little doctor's office and clinic set up where a lot of the care services are delivered there, whereas other times more care services are in the residence suite behind the door. And that gets to something that Taz was calling out, where if you're bringing with you a health professional that can really understand what your needs are, because frankly, for me as a family caregiver, I don't necessarily know what the impact on my loved one would be if they are receiving that care behind the door in their own suite versus if they're going to a more of a clinical office
Mm.
within the retirement home. But if there's somebody that really understands that side of healthcare, and if they can be observing and advocating for you on that side of things, it can really help to make sure that your loved one gets the care that they need so that then they can make the most out of the time that they have at the retirement home.
Sorry,
Go
do you
ahead,
mind if I
Taz.
just jump in? Daniel just brought up a really good point. That's actually really important about even where care is provided.
Mm.
And it also speaks to, Daniel, I think you were probably alluding to this too, but for the person, it's also about security, comfort, because if they have to receive care in their suite, there are some people that don't necessarily want the doctor to come to them, and there might be somebody with them. I'm not saying that there's nobody else with them, but it's also about transparent and how does that person feel if they're just somebody who's not feeling comfortable with that aspect? Is there an option? And in some retirement homes, there isn't an option. You have to follow sort of is told to you about different procedures. And I'm talking about like a doctor's visiting or something. The
Right.
other interesting aspect that what we're speaking to is also architecture. The design is really important in retirement homes and long-term care. And I think it's becoming more recognized that for specific population, for example, for memory care, there are now homes in Ontario, and Daniel and I could probably speak to this, that are actually being designed differently architecturally to meet the needs of people who have memory care needs and dementia. There's a home I want to say near Guelph
Mhm.
that was fascinating to me because people with memory care issues tend to pace, they tend to walk, and this entire home is built circularly so that they can keep going around literally in a circle and continue and all the care that's being provided. If someone wants to someone's pushing them in a wheelchair, they're going around in a circle. There's a lot of windows, there's a lot of light, and the same happens outdoors. Their area is sort of built circularly so that the person doesn't really feel like there's an end. It's not really confusing to the brain when you're going in a circular motion. So those are things that also I'm starting to look at as well, very much light. Light is a huge thing, especially in our hemisphere when we've got darkness for 4 to 6 months of the year.
Absolutely.
The light, we know that people change when there's less light and moods change. Brain injury specifically, Remy, as you know, is very
Mm.
sensitive to light, sleep patterns, but we are creatures that need light to do well even at night and to sleep. And so I really look at that too, because retirement homes are for profit. And this is one distinction we need to make in Ontario, that people understand retirement homes are for profit. Long-term care homes are not. They are nonprofit. And that's why when Daniel spoke about the pay, because it's under OHIP. So really they're different centers. You really can't compare
Right.
them because one is under OHIP and there's a level of care that is much more intricate and complex needed with nurses. But when you're looking at retirement homes and you're looking at profit, I'm also looking at places that have spent money on their facility to make sure that they're giving their residents and their families and their communities an investment in their health. So we're all looking at it with different lenses, but that's something I'm also looking at as well.
And something in the bathroom in residence suites can be somewhere that really stands out where is there enough space if somebody is in a wheelchair or has a walker that they can maneuver around or if they need some help in there? And something that I really pay attention to and I love when I see it in homes are showers that are curbless showers so that for all of us, that can be a time, it's a very private space. So if we're able to remain more independent by removing that lip in a shower, so it's easier for us to get in and out to walk or something like that, those are all things that can really help somebody maintain as much independence as possible. And there's
Mm.
all sorts of great retirement homes that have really paid attention to that to make sure that they're creating spaces for residents that as their conditions change, that they're really able to be that home for them that is just what that person needs.
And I noticed when we were touring Viva Thornhill Woods that there was a lot of light. There was a lot of care taken towards that. And I assume that Viva is not alone with that. There are a lot of retirement homes that have where the architecture of the place is taken into consideration the needs of the people that will be there, whether that's brain injury or otherwise. Some other things tack on to brain injury as we get older. The architecture is one thing, but one of the things that when I talk to other caregivers that was huge with them, and it is the staff, the training of the staff, the attitude of the staff, how many staff there are, how often the person is seen, that type of thing. Do you notice a huge variation in that, Daniel and Jill? Do your staff get particular training? Do you take that into account with their training and in their selection, interacting with people with, for example, a lot of the issues that accompany brain injury or getting older? So we'll start with you, Daniel.
So certainly across touring so many different homes, you certainly see differences in the staff, and part of it can just be you've been at homes where they just do memory care. So the type of staff that they have there, the approach, the way that interactions work are very different than some other homes that I've been at, where they either have a continuum of care or they're a lot more focused on independent living. It does go back to that in retirement homes that it is private pay. So typically you're going to see homes that have much more robust staffing are also going to be homes that are going to be on the more expensive side of things
Right.
because those people's salaries have to be paid for.
Is there a
But
variation did you notice a difference in terms of the level of training of the staff, how competent they are, how ready they are to deal with people with challenges?
yeah, so a lot of the times when we're doing tours, it is a lot of the softer side of retirement living that we're looking at where you're seeing a space, you're seeing the amenities. So I'm not, might be introduced to the director of care, but we're not really diving deep there. But you certainly do see everyone or almost everyone that you speak to, they talk about they want to be able to move somewhere where they have a continuum of care. And there are a lot of reasons why it's great that you can move somewhere and they can support you as you move through. But then you do certainly see a difference where, talking memory care specifically, if you're looking at a home that specializes in memory care, going back to what we were talking about before with the architecture and then getting into the staffing, that's really where I noticed the biggest differences are homes that specialize just in memory care as opposed to homes that are offering a much broader continuum of care.
And does Viva offer that? Do they have parts of the Viva that specialize in memory care? How are your staff trained to deal with the residents?
Yeah, so I'll just speak to the first part. So there's 8 Viva locations in Ontario right now. They
Mhm.
offer independent living and most of them also offer assisted living. However, we do have the 9th location that is currently under construction at Viva Leaside, and that one will be the first Viva that does offer memory care as well. And that's exactly it. It's a new building, so much planning has been gone into specifically how the memory care floor is going to be designed. So we're really excited to have that as an offering as part of Viva as well. Just Viva being a retirement home, we are regulated under the Retirement Home Regulatory Authority. So there is annual training that every single team member does need to take every single year. So whether you are a community relations manager, whether you are concierge or a dining room server or another manager, everybody does have to take the annual training, which does have a certain level of training on how to deal with different emergencies, different behaviors. But then many homes do offer specific training as well. So even if it's just from CPR and first aid training to different behavioral trainings that often are accompany different forms of dementia. And then in terms of the staffing, I do believe what Daniel said, it is very different from different homes, depending on just like the level of staffing and even the requirement for onboarding. So I will say at Viva, we do have a pretty lengthy onboarding and hiring process, but part of that is because we do want everyone to have a tagline saying happy you're here. And we want to ensure that those living here are in fact happier here, and this is their home. And people who work here see them probably more than they see their own families. So we need to make sure that the people that we have working here are the right fit also for the people living here. So I always promote, and I'll promote it now because it's one thing that I love about this is that so many of our full-time PSWs, so Viva, we're celebrating our 13-year anniversary next month. Many of our full-time PSWs have been here even before the building opened. And same with our dining room servers. There are many that have just celebrated their 12-year anniversary. And if you think about these roles, these are high demanding roles. They are dealing with the older seniors day in and day out. And as much as we are here to support them, a lot of times these seniors do have different ailments. It's not the easiest job. So the fact that they are here, they're always still smiling, I just think that world of them. So I always definitely put in a huge promotion for the people actually working with our seniors day in and day out.
And I would imagine that part of the staffing ratio, the amount of staff that you have makes a huge difference in that because one of the biggest stresses for a caregiver, Taz can speak to this as well, one of the things that accompanies sometimes a brain injury are behavioral changes. And whether that's a result of a brain injury or aging or dementia or Alzheimer's, it can be very exhausting. It can be very stressful dealing with someone whose behavior has changed and they can sometimes be quite aggressive, irritable, whatever. So to be there 24 hours a day as a caregiver is very different than being a staff at a retirement home or a long-term care facility. So I imagine the number of staff, because staff that are overworked are going to be in a lot of the position of a caregiver. So can you say to caregivers, if I'm bringing in my loved one and I know they're difficult to deal with and it isn't just their memory fog, it sometimes is their behavior, how can you reassure people that they're not going to be dealt with in a way that might be detrimental to them?
This is where it really does come from the team approach, right? So really understanding, because the families are the one that knew them, they know them currently where they're at, but they also know them from before the brain injury. So it's
Right.
really important to understand this person as a whole and not just what they're presenting with today when they come into the home. So trying to get a true understanding where they came from, what was their profession, what did they used to like to enjoy, what are some of their things that bring joy to them, but then also understanding what are their triggers, what things have helped them calm down in the past, so that we really can work together as a team, because we always want to assure people that their loved one is going to be in a safe, supportive environment, but we need to make sure that we have full understanding of who this person is, and it's just a constant ongoing collaboration as well with the families.
Myths about retirement homes, preconceptions. You had mentioned, Jill, that often people contact you a little late because they were resistant to the idea of a retirement home. And part of that is there are images of retirement homes that people have where they're a place to park your loved one and they just basically sit there. They're ignored. How, and Daniel, you could perhaps talk about this as well. How much different is the retirement home landscape from that type of image of a retirement home as just a place to sit and wait?
Yeah, and I don't expect everybody to know about retirement homes or the differences within the retirement homes themselves and then the differences with long-term care, because I think there isn't a lot of information just in the general population about it. So when somebody does call me, and you spend quite a bit of time on the phone just before they even come in, because it's really important to get an understanding and a picture of exactly what it is they're looking for, because I have my language, independent living, assisted living, respite, long-term care, but not everybody understands that. So you're just trying to really break it down into what they are looking for.
Right.
Because a lot of people say, well, no, they're not independent. They were looking at this because they don't want to cook anymore. But in my mind, that's still independent living. So really getting an understanding of what it is they're looking for, and then also sharing what we do have to offer. And then the big thing really does come when they come in for the tour. I can't tell you how many times I've heard people come in and they are really surprised by what they see, right? It really very much is like condo style living. We've been compared to living on a stationary cruise ship many times because it's all inclusive living, but with the model that you can age in place. The care is optional, but it's there for when you need it. It's not dark. There's different homes. Some are older, some maybe were never designed right from the beginning to be a retirement home. So it is important to tour different homes, but I will say they're what people have in their image of this dark, dingy, sometimes
Yeah.
smelly place. It certainly isn't that. So I do encourage people to do their research, even just on their websites. Many have virtual tours.
Now,
Sorry,
Daniel, how much? Go
sorry,
ahead.
Rem, I wanted to speak to that because I'm sort of the health professional listening to the conversation, and you had raised some really good points that hopefully we may get to, and that's about equity and gaps in the system and accessibility. You and I also transparently had a really good conversation when we left the tour, and you and
Mhm.
I talked about who's eligible to live in a retirement home. If we look across the socioeconomic spectrum, there is going to be a certain level of groups that will be eligible to live in a retirement home, and then others who just won't. And so, what we have to also realize is that we've got an entire spectrum of people who live in Ontario, and some that have financial means to have options of where they live. Even aging in place is a privilege. It is a
Yeah.
privilege because to age in place means you have to have resources and care. To live in a retirement home, in a good retirement home, is a privilege in Ontario. The only one that obviously is the system of OHIP is the long-term care. And long-term care, again, it's obviously for people who need 24-hour care. But long-term care, I will say, also has gotten a really bad rep, just like Jill is talking about retirement homes and different homes. But long-term care has also gotten a bad rep. I think what has changed the way that people look at things now is COVID. And Daniel and I could probably sit and have a lot of conversations about how many people more now are asking different questions, walking into any facility post-COVID, knowing what's happened across the board in Ontario with COVID. I think a lot of things that were not before were brought out just because of a situation that occurred. And there's a lot more questions occurring. There's been a lot of more legislation changes that are going to occur. I also work on the personal injury side for medical legal. So I know there's a lot of lawyers out there right now representing people that had horrible situations occur during COVID in different facilities, in different parts of the province. So these are all things that we need to look at. The long-term care homes, I want to say something good that's happening in Ontario is that 30 new homes have been approved over the last few years that are now culturally appropriate homes. So they were funded based on language, religion, culture. And Daniel may also have heard this, but some of these homes are amazing. The new homes that are being built near me in Markham, there's a new Yi Hong coming down the street from me. It looks fantastic. I'm
There's
going
one
to
down the
also
street from me.
and they're all starting to build. I travel a lot to see people as you know me, so I start to see what's popping up in different communities. One that I'm going to tell Daniel, I know long-term care may not be on your website, but I think one that you should go tour. It's just starting into phase. It hasn't fully opened. It's called Generations Toronto. It's my community, the Smiley Muslim community is opening up. Generations, it's a huge building. It's actually a community complex, I would say, at Don Mills and Eglinton. And it's a tower. It looks like a condo tower. But inside that tower, you've got a 122 bed long-term care home. You've got a daycare center because the generations believe in intergenerational living, and that communities need to have intergenerational mixing for health, for dignity, for compassion. In that home, they also will have market, lower than market level housing for people who need it. It's going to have a kitchen, 2,000 meals they'll be making a day for the community, for who needs to have it. So it's also going to have a medical clinic. These are models now that are being built for the province and that I'm proud to say are not just the long-term care homes of 30, 50 years ago that we used to look at. So we're raising the bar now about who
Do those
is.
still exist, Taz, Daniel? Are there still long-term care facilities that fit the stereotype of the dark, sort of dingy, sort of old people smelling places that you really wouldn't want to put anybody in?
Yeah.
I want to be careful how we word that. There is legislation that has gotten stronger. So things have changed.
So
The
that's
smelly
what's
part,
helped you find is that there's more oversight.
yes, there is. But I want to say the smelly, I wanted to say, Daniel and I both know that there is, every place can smell, even retirement homes can smell. But I want to assure people who are listening to this podcast that there's legislation, there are audits, there are inspections that happen. So if they are seeing that where their family member is, they should be reporting that. They should be reporting it because it should not be happening. We should not be seeing such poor care. Sorry, Daniel, I cut you off
So
there.
so the two of you haven't seen any big horror stories for that. Places that you would not want anyone to be staying in.
So in long-term care, there are certainly long-term care homes where you walk in there and you'll be like, you wish we had a higher standard in
Okay.
place. So it is something where we are raising the level for long-term care, but we still have a ways to go. So for example, I volunteer in a long-term care home where I think that they do a terrific job there. It's a municipally run home. So long-term care homes can either be owned municipally, owned nonprofit, or owned for profit. And a lot of times we find that a lot of people that we hear from, it's in a lot of the municipal homes are some of the homes that people have the highest satisfaction. And also the culturally designated homes are definitely something where a lot of times just some obvious things that people have every day. A lot of times the food is much better in the culturally designated homes. And so we actually let people filter homes either by the language of care or culture of the home on El Dorado, because we think that that information should be a lot easier for people to find. So completely agree with Taz that there is legislation in effect right now in that there are more inspections happening. So we still have a ways to go to get to the point where I would like long-term care to be, but there still also on the news, you hear about horror stories, and there are some horrible things that have happened in the world of long-term care. But I can also tell you where I volunteer, there are residents that are living their best life in a long-term care home, that are living very fulfilled lives while they're there. So that's important as well, because if you look at yourself, if you put yourself in the shoes of somebody who is potentially going to be moving into long-term care and all you have heard is, this is horrible, you're going to have a
Yeah.
terrible time, it is all these really bad things, then when you move in, whether that's completely the case or not, like, that's what you're going to see. And that's your preconceived notion. And I do completely agree with Taz that it's really important that we balance the narrative, not that we don't think that there's still work to be done and ways for these things to be improved, but that it's not all bad and that there are people that really are living their best lives in long-term care homes, and there's certainly plenty of people who are living their best lives in retirement homes.
So it's not just a function of how much money you're paying. You might not, because we say you get what you pay for, and people with greater means, and Taz touched on this as well. We're going to talk about this in a second. People with greater means are going to have a better retirement. They're going to have better food. They're going to have more social interaction, but that's not necessarily the case. There are long-term care facilities that are funded, that are not necessarily paid for by the residents, that can give as good an experience as you would get in a retirement home. Am I correct in that?
They're different, right? Can't compare a retirement home to a long-term care home in terms of care needs. So they're two distinct level of care. I think Jill would agree with me when I say that. Remember, legislatively, they're under two different legislations, right? You've got the Retirement Act and you've got the Long-Term Care Act, two very different entities in our province. So I don't want us to compare the two, but just like Daniel is saying that long-term care has gotten a bad rep, the same can be said for retirement facilities. I've seen really good ones, and then I've seen not good ones. But again, we need to look at this in terms of who is going to what. Why are they going to it? What is the level of care that they need? But the reason I just made that distinction about long-term care is because I think traditionally long-term care, because it's OHIP funded, has gotten a bad rep. And so I just wanted to say that there are changes being made in the province of Ontario. There are different nonprofits now walking in and saying, we'd like to do this. And how can we do this with dignity and compassion and do this better? And I'll tell you something that if you look at some of the new facilities coming out there, the ministry that is co-funding these facilities, you'd be amazed at what is happening with nonprofit. I think Daniel could speak to that as well. There's some pretty neat things. So that's why I was telling Daniel, go tour some of these new facilities because they're actually quite amazing. And I think it's going to just elevate the bar. It's going to elevate the bar, not just for long-term care, but just for care in general. We need to look at these other places. And when third parties are coming in that are nonprofit, I'm looking at nonprofit, not third parties, there is no other reason for them to be building this other than they're doing it for their community. And there's other, obviously, ethno or cultural reasons that they're participating. But we need to look at this because it can only raise the level of care for everybody in the province.
Would you agree with
And,
that?
yeah, well, and a big part and something that we as a society have to wrestle with is we all hope to live long, prosperous lives, but what do we want our life to look like if we do end up in a long-term care home? Because for any complaint people have about long-term care, you can go back to looking at how much funding is that long-term care home getting, because although the resident is responsible for a copay amount, the vast majority of the money is provincial funding. So the long-term care homes are constrained by the funding envelope that they receive. So for everybody that points at long-term care and can nitpick at it or call out some of the things, that there are things that legitimately need to be improved within long-term care. But then we also have to look at how it's funding, and you can look at the food and say, oh, I don't think the food in a lot of long-term care homes are great, but then you look at the way that what's budgeted each day for residents to have 3 meals and 3 snacks throughout the day, and you would look at it and think, how could I ever make that work? So that's an important part of the conversation. I was disappointed in the last provincial election that long-term care didn't become part of the conversation, because the reality is that over the next 20 years, our population of people over 85 is going to triple. So these challenges that we're facing now, they're only going to get bigger. They're only going to get more challenging. And you can't just snap your fingers and fix these problems overnight. It's going to take a long time to turn this ship. And that's something that as a society, we see the iceberg ahead. And some people will say you've already hit it, but we need to start thinking about what is this going to look like? Because we know we've got an aging population.
And it'll take a lot of money. Now, one of the things that occurred to me, Taz, as you were talking, and you as well, Daniel, and Jill, your facility is right here in the Greater Toronto area. Is there a huge variation across the province? Because people watching this video may be watching it from Keswick or Timmins or Kapuskasing or somewhere else in Ontario. The ability to find appropriate facilities much different once you leave the large population centers?
Yeah, I can speak to that because I try and get around the province quite a bit. So when you're in one of the somewhere like the GTA, you've got a lot more variety, and also find that there's a lot more newer facilities. When you get into rural, a lot of times they are working with the infrastructure that is already in place. Now there is a push to start building more in more rural communities, in part because it's just so expensive to be building right now in the GTA. But if you're requiring specialized care, then that is something that can be a challenge, because if you're in a rural area where maybe you've only got one or two retirement homes, maybe you've got a long-term care home that you're on the wait list, but you're not able to get into yet, then there's no guarantee that those retirement homes would be able to provide the care that you're looking for. They just, for the sake of this conversation, there's all sorts of areas where they don't have any retirement homes in these rural communities where they're offering memory care, or where they're offering more enhanced versions of assisted living. And part of it can be whether the building has the infrastructure in place to support it. Something else that becomes a very real challenge in a lot of communities is how do they get the staff in there in order to provide that care? Because if we're talking, PSWs, a lot of times PSWs are going to be relying on transit in particular communities. And if there isn't transit there for people to be able to get into work, then those homes just aren't able to provide some of the levels of care that they would like to. So we can try and look at these problems and feel like, oh, that just on very surface level, if we do this, then we'll do that. But they're really multi-layered challenges that we have here that look at broader aspects of infrastructure, and just something that Taz had touched on, the equity aspect, not just for residents, but then also for the way that different homes are being able to be serviced by the staff.
Taz, have you noticed are there people that put their loved ones in homes that are actually quite far from where they live, where they simply have to really travel in order to find the kind of facility that would work?
Absolutely. He's absolutely spot on. And what Daniel is now speaking to speaks to infrastructure, but looking at the healthcare system in Ontario, that's a bigger conversation that we're going to have. But if a place also doesn't have a family doctor, so now you think about this, right? If there's going to be a problem in getting a family doctor in that particular town, let's say in Northern Ontario, I'm in Northern Ontario a lot. And so I have people who are traveling quite distances to just even see a family doctor. Do you think a retirement home is going to build a home in a place where there isn't even a medical infrastructure in that town? They're not going to. So this becomes a problem on multi layers, but it starts to impact every aspect of care. And then we go down to the lowest level, and that's the person in their home. So you've got someone like me traveling 2, 3 hours sometimes to go see someone because in our area, Remy, also there isn't, I see a lot of pediatric brain injuries. I see a lot of children. I treat even, I've worked with Indigenous communities. So if you're talking about someone like me having to travel hours just to get to someone, can you imagine where that person is now going to have options to move their loved one? So they have to move them really far out sometimes. This is where it becomes a problem for brain injury. We know that for brain injury, moving someone out of their community, out of their routine is extremely disruptive. I would even go a step further and say it's probably for every human. Okay. If you move a human being out of their entire community, you're now going to be looking at immediately health decline because the most important parts of health are social. They are also going to be mobility. And if they were already comfortable in their area, where are they moving? Are they going to be mobile still? Is there the ability to be mobile? And then you've also got the cognitive piece that now they already know their area and now you're moving them somewhere else. So moving someone out of their area, especially a brain injury individual, is, I would say in my prediction, would likely not fare well in their health. But like Daniel said, there's a lot of people and places, they don't have a choice in Ontario. We're just talking about the GTA and you hear people talk and, oh, I've got this choice. And then you go talk to someone else up north and they're saying to me the closest option is 3 hours away. And
Especially the
that
most affordable option. And again, that kind of leads me into that cost thing. When Jill shared with us, and Viva is by no means the very top of the retirement home community, I would say, Jill, you're in the middle, what you offer in terms of retirement homes, or maybe a little above.
Well, it's not even Viva specific. It's very much location specific. So Viva
Right.
Thornhill Woods is going to be priced different than Viva Whitby or Viva Barhaven in Ottawa. So I would say that we are on a bit more of the higher end home. And I think just from the amenities that we offer as well, that speaks for it. But it's very much based on where the location is as well.
And so does Viva have facilities up in Northern Ontario in smaller communities? They're just basically in the large urban centers then.
Yeah, correct.
Now, when you first talked about the price of things, and I mentioned it to friends of mine, they said, wow, that's a lot to spend every month for that facility. But when you think about it, that includes all your food, that includes everything, right?
And that's one thing that I do like to highlight also because you're paying a monthly rate, but within your monthly rate, a portion of it is going to be your rent. And so that rent portion is controlled. So the annual increase is controlled by the government. And then the rest of the portion, and normally it's more than 50%, that is for your services, your hospitality, and your care. And a lot of that portion is tax deductible. So on your annual income statement, you can claim the part that is the care and some of the services. So there are some tax benefits too when it comes to the rate, because I do agree sometimes when you see the full monthly rate, it does seem a little bit overwhelming. But when you do a little bit more of a cost comparison and what exactly is the rent portion and what you're getting for the hospitality and the services and the meals, it makes it a little bit more manageable.
Especially, you mentioned also when we were talking to you that often when people move in, if they are lucky enough to be homeowners and own their own home, they've sold that because they're not moving back necessarily. And so they have the proceeds to pay for that. But, and Taz and Daniel, I can talk to you about this. Not everybody's in that situation. Not everybody owns a home. Not everybody has means and time necessarily to wait for long-term care. What is in the future of someone, for example, who lives at or just above the poverty line and they're approaching their retirement years, or the person they're looking after is in need of long-term care or a retirement home? What is their future?
I can start because Taz, you'll probably have a lot more on the medical resources that are available, but something if you feel like you need some extra support, you're going to want to engage Ontario Health at Home. So through Ontario Health at Home, that's who you would apply to long-term care with, but that's also where you can look into getting some home care services, or if there's somebody in the family who's your designated caregiver, getting them a little bit of respite care. So that's all public care that's available through Ontario Health at Home. So it's not private pay. You're not paying out of pocket. In a lot of instances, people are going to find that they're not eligible for nearly as much care as they'd hope for through Ontario Health at Home, but that's one option. And then also something that we've seen a lot of families take advantage of with great success is a variety of day programs that are available, whether it's through seniors community centers, whether it's through places like the Alzheimer's Society. But there's some different day programs that can, a lot of times there is going to be a fee associated with it, but it can be a lot more affordable than private home care, or if you can't afford to be in a retirement home, it can be something that's an option as well.
As
Daniel brought up a good point. The day programs really need to get some attention that they deserve. They run on very low minimal cost, and there are brain injury program drop-ins, Remy, that we actually put in our newsletter. We just got contacted, I believe it was York Simcoe. They actually had a lot of spaces available and they want to fill them because we want to make sure that people are using these programs that are getting public funding as well. I guess it also gets harder sometimes in the winter time for people to access these other resources outside the home. I can speak to Ontario at home as well, health at home. Let's just say it's in progress. I'm not going to give it an A grade. I'm not going to grade it right now. I think it's a process right now that the province still needs to work on. Yes, we could be doing better. We know what the research shows. Putting more OTs in an emergency room in a hospital will cause less people to return, less elderly people and other people to return back into the hospital. So we have to look at it in a staged manner. How can we keep people living at home? And I used a term called aging in place. This has gotten a lot of attention over the last, I would say, 5-7 years. And what it means having the health and social supports and services that you can live safely and independently in your home or your community as long as you wish and are able. And that's really important, that wish and able, because what that means is that we really need to have some better supports publicly funded to let people stay in their home. We know it's cheaper to have care provided at home instead of someone ending up in a hospital. And a lot of the calls Jill gets is when people are in hospital, right? And now they're like, what do we do? But that also, that home piece is something we really need to look at much earlier, but also funding for it. So there has been an increase in funding, Remy, recently for particular people. I think you and I were talking about this. There's an allotment that has been increased, and that's great. I'm glad to see it. Do we need to do more? Yes. Do we need to have more access to other therapists that can come into the home longer and stay with the person longer and treat them? Yes, we do. I'm on the private side, so I can personally tell you, I see these wonderful therapists coming in, but they're strained at how many times they can visit and what they can do, and then they're in and out. And that's not going to be sustaining for good health. You need somebody in a little bit longer. So absolutely agree with all of Daniel's points, but those community services, I urge families to contact. You can start with your family doctor. They should be able to put in a referral and then get connected with a case manager through Home Med Health, Ontario. They've changed their name so many times. I'm just going to tell you in the last 5 years, I can probably list them all out. That is also needs to stop. I'm just going to say that to the government. Please stop that, because it is so confusing when I'm talking to families. Daniel, you probably find this too. People still use home care. They use Lynn. There's so much confusion about what do they access that at some point we just need to let the system settle on a name and then keep it long term. So that's going to be my piece for that.
Absolutely. When they changed the name from Home and Community Care Support Services to Ontario Health at Home, the number of people who contacted us saying, where do I find home and community care support services now. Like little changes like that, but have a big impact on families because they aren't necessarily, it's not something that's always going to be top of mind. They're not going to their website all the time, so it can be very confusing. The other, if we're just putting in requests to politicians, is to use the word long-term care as opposed, there's a lot of different verbiage that you hear with our politicians using instead of long-term care. So just making it simple for everybody. This is long-term care, this is retirement homes, because it's already more than enough confusion in the space before we start throwing around different acronyms, different terms for talking about the same thing.
I know my head's spinning just listening to the two of you talk. I didn't know about the old one, let alone the new one. And that brings me to one of my last questions for all three of you. I am, for example, a caregiver. My wife has a brain injury. We're not, maybe not even necessarily my position. Or it could be a caregiver for someone who they don't have a lot of means. They don't own a house, that type of thing. And we know that in maybe 5, 6, 7 years, that person is going to need more care than I can provide them. Where do I start? What's my timeline? What do I do first? What do I do second? How do I get into this? Where do I inform myself? How do I find out about this? How do I start navigating this? I guess that should have been my first question, but I think it sums up everything we've been talking about.
So I'll just start by saying I think so many people don't even know that they have this question, but thankfully we have the individuals like Daniel who do know that this question needs to be asked. And you didn't really talk too much the full spectrum of his website, but I think this is the perfect opportunity because where do you go? The first place you go is eldorado.ca.
Yeah, thank you, Jill. So I can take it from that where that's absolutely what we try and do is help people to navigate all their long-term care and retirement home options because we don't know where to start. We don't take a class on this. We have to figure this out as we go. So that's what we try and do at Eldorado's. We've got a website where you can navigate and compare all your different options. So for example, say you were to pull up Viva Thornhill Woods, you might find for them, pictures, a video tour, sample menu, activity calendars, a description of the home. You can see their Google reviews. You can see their care services. Things are going to start giving you a feel for what day-to-day life is like at the home. By no means do we think that you should just be making your decision by going on Eldorado. I do think it's really important to get to spend some time inside homes. So Remy, using the example you're talking about, where maybe it's going to be 5 or 6 years down the line, start now by taking advantage of opportunities where there are open houses or other events that are going on at various homes so that they happen. You hear about them a lot more in retirement homes, but they do happen in long-term care as well, where you can actually get inside and start getting a sense for which homes could feel like a good fit. And if you do find a home, whether it's a long-term care home or a retirement home, where it really feels like this could be the right place and you've still got a few years in front of you, then look at volunteer opportunities to get to spend more time in there, to get more of a sense of what it's actually like. Because as much as I really enjoy and have got to learn a lot from the 77 tours that I went on last year, do realize that that is just a little glimpse into what life is actually like. Whereas if you are able to spend some time inside some of the different homes and get a sense of what's on offer, then you can just be better informed for when it's time for you to make that decision. Because something that puts a lot of families in a difficult spot is that they've just delayed these sort of decisions and now they have to make them during a very stressful time where they might be under time pressure. And so they're having to make these very big decisions that can have a real impact on their loved one's quality of life. And they're making that in a really stressful, condensed headspace.
And so start early is the message there because it's going to take longer than you think. Should I be talking to people like you, Taz, and because you have a better idea of what's out there in addition to maybe going to El Dorado?
You know what? There's also a lot more services out there now. I have seen them. I've seen some that have been around for 20, 25 years. They're just getting more traction now. So these are services, they're actually health professionals who specialize in the transition. And so they work with the family, and that means they could work with the family over different phases of the person's health. So it could be an occupational therapist, but there are social workers who do this. I think that one of the persons I've linked you to, Remy, in the past that I was talking to you about has been doing this service for over 30 years. It's a small investment into a huge decision. But what that does is it adds another layer and perspective. But with services that Daniel is offering, that is also key. But it has to start with what are the needs? What are the person's health? First of all, what are the health conditions? What are we looking at? What is the person's needs? What are the environment that they're living in right now? There is a huge socioeconomic factor. Then what does this person want? We all forget about that piece as well, but really at the core of it is what does this person want their years to look like? Daniel talked about this, but at the end of the day, we all want quality of life. We all want that no matter where we're living. And how much services does this person have? How many resources does this person have? Does the person have family? Do they not have family? So all of these things need to be considered well in advance. And hopefully by bringing somebody in, they can spend a little bit of money up front, but start doing the investigations that are going to save them probably a lot of heartache and make some decisions down the line that either lead them to assisted living at a retirement home. First, maybe it's aging in place, then it's a retirement home, and then eventually, if they need to, it's a long-term care facility. But again, it depends on where the trajectory is of that person.
Is that a conversation that an occupational therapist or some other person, health professional, will eventually have with someone with a brain injury when they start seeing the signs and they say, oh, by the way, from what I'm seeing over the years, this might be a good time to start looking into things like that? Do
Yeah,
occupational
agreed.
therapists generally have those conversations, and how difficult are they?
So occupational therapists really are the only rehab therapists we don't have an office, right? Most occupational therapists come into the home, the ones who work in the community. We say our office is your home. It's your workplace. And so we're the ones who are actually looking at the environment that the person is in, that they have to function in, whether it be a school, a workplace, the home environment. I would say it's a really good place to start. It does not have to be an expert in aging in place by no means. It could be a therapist that just came in from community services, right? So from home at health that came in to visit the home. And it could be a conversation that they could just start having with that OT about, most people will say to us, I'm concerned about the stairs or I'm concerned about the bathroom. Daniel mentioned about, we call them zero threshold showers, right? And Daniel saying, I'm glad to see this more and more in the retirement homes. And then you'll talk to an OT and I would say, why wasn't that happening 10 years ago? Like, why were they all zero thresholds 10 years ago? Because if they want to have more business and be better business people, then they should be being fully universally accessible. Every place, I believe, honestly, we should go to universal accessibility. But those are the conversations that need to be had. Just in the last 3 years, I can tell you, I get calls from family and friends routinely now. It's gone up since COVID. I get calls just to say, Taz, can we just talk to you? Can we just ask you some questions? Because they don't, but that means they also don't know where to go, right? If Daniel's talking about changing names for community services all the time, that means people are confused. But I'm happy to help and set them on a path of where they can start going down and get the information. And if I'm treating them, then that's part of my role with them.
You talked about them contacting you. Has it been your experience where you drop hints and you bring up the conversation?
Only if I'm asked or only if I'm treating. If it's a family member, and I know what I'll say, if you need any help, let me know. I let them know what my role is, but I can't insert myself into a situation, especially when it's family and friends. Remy, you have to be a little bit more careful. So I have to maintain that boundary, but I do offer it. But it's interesting. Daniel talks about this word of mouth. It's amazing how fast word of mouth can go around. And so I'm going to go from here and talk about, I already have been talking about Thornhill Woods, and I'm going to go and talk about Daniel's services. And Daniel might say to somebody, wait a minute, I just know something that I can ask an OT. And all of this, what we're doing, just builds more information sharing. And that's what I think is needed.
And something that I'll comment that I've seen Jill do it, and I have noticed it at a number of retirement homes, is as much as we can advocate for people to be proactive, there are certainly plenty of situations where suddenly a family's in crisis, and then what do you do? And I have noticed that there will be all sorts of people it could be Jill at Aviva Thornhill Woods, where a family comes in and you know what, like not the right place for you, but Jill has a good perspective on what else is around in the community. And that is something that I have really been blown away by in the retirement living space is that just the number of communities where they are really trying to look out for the people that are moving in. And if we're not the right home for you, then we're going to use whatever resources we have to help point out which homes would be the right fit for you, because it is everyone who gets into the space. And it seems like everybody's got a story or some sort of personal involvement. And that's something that I've certainly seen from Viva Thornhill Woods and all sorts of other retirement homes.
And I guess at Viva, you've gotten referrals from other retirement homes because you're a better fit than, for example, they might be.
Absolutely. And it was one of the things that I also was surprised and happily surprised by when I got into this industry and specifically this role, is that it really is a collaboration with the other homes, right? We're close proximity, so location may work for a family, but we all have different offerings. And that's why, one of the things when we were talking about what do people ask, where do they go? Well, one of the very first things that they need to do is think deep down and have the discussion with the family is, what are the must-haves, right? What can I not live without? What does the perfect retirement home look like? So my must-haves, my would like to haves, and my definitely have nots, because then that will help narrow down their search a little bit too.
And certainly Daniel's website helps a lot with that. That's wow. There's a lot of information to absorb. It certainly looks like a much more positive landscape for people moving their loved ones into retirement home or long-term care than I think a lot of people anticipate. So I do thank all three of you for answering my questions. I think this is a good place to start for caregivers and brain injury survivors, or even people who are without brain injuries, who are looking at making that transition. And it can be a long one, it can be a difficult one, but certainly it's gotten a little easier than I would have anticipated. And I appreciate your answering all my questions. Hopefully, we'll maybe have a chance to talk a little bit more, and in case I have any other questions. But thank you for spending your Monday morning talking to me and filling us in. I think people will get a lot of use out of this podcast, and at least it gives them in Ontario a place to start here. Thank you again. Thanks,
Thanks,
Tess.
Remy.
Thanks, Daniel. Thank
Thank
you,
Thank
Jill.
you.